It's 1944, and the horrors of the Second World War are raging. U.S. sailors leap into the sea for safety as explosions rock their battleships. Japanese planes circle from above, but the damage to the U.S. ships isn't caused by their weapons. It's caused by the planes themselves. As the sailors watch in horror, the Japanese planes nosedive toward their ships before going up in a ball of fire, one larger than could have possibly come from an accidental crash. Was that plane full of explosives? Was it designed to crash like this, even at the cost of the lives of their pilots? Such is the way of the kamikaze. The Pacific theater of World War II was a hellish experience for both the Allies and the Axis, though the Empire of Japan may have suffered greater losses than it needed to because of an emphasis on unconventional tactics. The Japanese fighter pilots, known as the Special Attack Units, or unofficially kamikaze, were a terror to both themselves and their enemies, inflicting ruinous tai-atari, or body attacks, by dive bombing directly into opposing ships. Though the damage dealt by the kamikaze was substantial, sometimes enough to outright sink the enemy, the pilots who succeeded in hitting their targets rarely survived the resulting explosion. For the Japanese army, this intentional trade of a single combatant for the potential of massive casualties among the Allies was an acceptable cost of warfare. According to traditional samurai codes that date back centuries, it was better to die in battle than to be captured and made to surrender peacefully. But was the kamikaze tactic actually as effective as the Japanese hoped it would be? Today we're going to present the evidence and find out why, logistically, the total impact of the special attack units led to a waste of resources and the hastening of the Axis's fall. The timeline of World War II shows us that these tactics were used by both sides before Japan's formal adoption and development of the special attack unit. Generally, this sort of attack was a desperate measure taken by the pilots whose planes were already going down in flames. The assault on Pearl Harbor in December 1941 provides an early example of a kamikaze maneuver being enacted by the Japanese side. First Lieutenant Fusata Aida is said to have driven his critically damaged plane into the naval center Kaneohe, as he denoted for a worthy enemy target for the decisive gambit. Albert Axel's book on the culture behind the kamikaze attack states that before the battle, Aida informed his men that he was willing to strike down on the enemy, even in death. Incidental tai-ataris like Aida's occurred sporadically throughout the several Pacific theater battles before an official investigation into the effectiveness of kamikaze warfare was organized on June 15, 1944. One former test pilot turned naval captain, Motoharu Okamura, believed in the concept, and history shows that Okamura's superiors came around to his way of thinking. "There is no other way," Okamura stated famously. "There will be more than enough volunteers for this chance to save our country, and I would like to command such an operation. Provide me with 300 planes, and I will turn the tide of the war." In order for the kamikaze to be accepted as a viable maneuver, it would need to be as destructive to the enemy target as possible to make up for the inherent loss of life. For this reason, the planes chosen for tai-atari were packed with explosive materials, whether that was bombs, grenades, or even torpedoes. The advantage of relying on explosives to deliver the brunt of the damage meant that the overall quality of the aircraft didn't matter when executing the attacks. This actually made Okamura's proposal more attractive to the Japanese Navy, as fighting the US meant having to consistently compete with more advanced planes and more experienced pilots. While Japan had undergone rapid industrialization prior to the Great War, much of its military growth was fostered through amicable relationships with its global allies. Their main ally, Germany, was indisposed to helping Japan in the Pacific because it was prioritizing attempts to keep control of more immediate Axis territory in Europe. Japan was practically fighting against one of the strongest naval forces in the world alone. While imperial propaganda worked overtime to connect the kamikaze strategy to samurai codes of honor, known as Bushido, there was a cold and calculated truth in the acknowledgement that this was perhaps the best way to leverage their underperforming assets. The name kamikaze itself was coined in the nationalistic Japanese press to recall a celebrated and serendipitous victory in the country's past. When the Mongol Empire invaded Japan in the 13th century, there was an understandable fear that the island nation could become another vassal state of what was at the time the most expensive military and political power in the world. And yet, the arrival of seaborne typhoons decimated the Mongol fleet and effectively secured Japan's defense before a prolonged land war could be fought. Thus, the wind that brought the typhoons was seen as divine intervention, kami meaning God, and kaze meaning wind. Since the connection between the Air Force and the wind was apt enough for the official Japanese name for the special attack units to be Shinpu Tokobetsu Kokukitai, or Spirit Wind Special Attack Units, involving the real-life story of Kamikaze, served to make the strategy's relationship to the celebrated history of Japan more explicit. It was a two-pronged effort, where the military side of the government strived to make the most of a lackluster air force. In contrast, the propaganda side emphasized the historical precedent for the Special Attack Unit and its alleged honorable and noble purpose. These intertwining narratives fed into each other and increased the Empire's fervor to develop the use of Special Attack Units. Training for the first unit began that summer, and as Okamura had predicted, the vast majority of Kamikaze pilots were volunteers. There were reportedly so many, in fact, that Okamura even called the eager recruits a swarm of bees, alluding to the fact that bees often die after they sting humans. If that sounds like an unusually dehumanizing way of referring to young volunteer soldiers, especially from one's own nation, it was probably because the Imperial Command did not, in fact, have a high regard for human life. An excerpt from the literature given to Kamikaze pilots in training read, "When you eliminate all thoughts about life and death, you will be able to totally disregard your earthly life. This will also enable you to concentrate your attention on eradicating the enemy with unwavering determination, meanwhile reinforcing your excellence in flight skills." The 30-day training period for Kamikaze pilots was brutal and cruel. Beatings were a regular part of the process, with some ex-Kamikaze trainees later saying they were hit so hard and so repeatedly in the face that he would sometimes look unrecognizable. The pain and cruelty were thought to give the pilots a fighting spirit, when in reality it probably just beat them down to be extra pliable to the orders of their superiors. Recruits were given very specific instructions on how to carry out their attacks too. They were instructed to aim their plane between the bridge tower and the smokestacks of the ships they were attacking, facing their own death with open eyes to ensure that their aim was true. As the plane rapidly descended toward its explosive finale, they were instructed to yell "Hisatsu," which meant sink without fail or certain kill. And there certainly were kills. According to most counts, almost 4,000 Kamikaze pilots died over the course of the war, killing around 7,000 members of the naval personnel in the process. There are records of conscripted Korean prisoners being counted among the Japanese volunteers who were sent to die as Kamikaze pilots, a stark contrast to the supposed brave nationalistic spirit that compelled the average Japanese young man to become a special attack unit. The official narrative of an all-volunteer Kamikaze force has been contested by the numerous personal accounts of conflicted pilots that were uncovered after the war by historians. The sad story of Yukio Seki, the leader of the first successful Kamikaze attack, is one such account. Seki was a 23-year-old graduate of the Japanese Naval Academy and a newly married man who lived near a flying school in Ibaraki Prefecture with his wife Mariko. There he served as a flying instructor for several months until he was transferred, first to a military post in Taiwan and 3 weeks later to the Philippines. It was 1944, and before the autumn season was over, Seki's life would be forfeit to the cause of the Japanese Empire. The fleet commander of the Japanese Navy stationed in the military was a man named Takejiro Onishi, who initially opposed the Taiatari as heresy. Still, he went on to order the formation of a special attack unit within his troops. Because of this, some historians consider Onishi the father of the Kamikaze, a surprising legacy given his prior stance. Yukio Seki was the 24th pilot selected for the squadron and is said to have paused for several seconds before solemnly accepting his newly assigned role. He was appointed to the head of the squadron, named Shikishima, and seemed in most respects to be ready to fight for his country as part of the Special Attack Unit. In a letter that Yukio Seki wrote to his parents-in-law, he spoke favorably of his promotion and being chosen to carry out the Taiatari. He stated, "There is nothing that surpasses this, as the long-cherished desire as a military man." His letter to Mariko was a bit more self-effacing, containing the quote, "I am truly sorry for going to fall without being able to do anything for you." It was Yukio Seki's only correspondence with Mariko before the mission would be carried out. They'd been married less than a year, and he would knowingly never return to her. October 1944, the training and preparation of the Special Attack Unit was far enough along that Japan was prepared to bring Kamikaze tactics to the field of battle. In the Battle of Leyte Gulf, incidentally the largest naval battle in history, the Shikishima was deployed under Yukio Seki's command. He and 5 other bomb-laden planes would target and destroy enemy ships through the sacrificial Taiataris they had been conditioned for. Before he embarked on his mission, Yukio Seki was interviewed by the news media, and his words demonstrated an uncharacteristic reluctance to engage in Kamikaze. He expressed his doubts as to the effectiveness of the maneuver, suddenly willing to admit publicly that an adequately trained pilot could drop the bombs and escape with an unscathed aircraft. The following quote shows that at the time he harbored outright disdain for his upcoming role. Japan's future is bleak if it is forced to kill one of its best pilots. I am not going on this mission for the Emperor or for the Empire. I'm going because I was ordered to. Yukio Seki did not survive the Battle of Leyte Gulf. His fated target, the aircraft carrier USS St. Lo, was sunk during the battle, though there is some debate over whether or not Seki was the pilot who sunk it. Observations from the battlefield even describe the flight pattern of the Japanese aviator who pulled off the attack as attempting the strategy that Seki described in his interview. There is the depressing possibility that even while in the air, Yukio Seki was clinging to the possibility that his life could continue past the war, that he would be able to return to Japan and see his beloved Mariko again. A third letter written by Seki before the mission was addressed to his flying students at Ibaraki. My students fall like mountain cherry blossoms. He was among the older pilots in the program, with many being as young as 18. He was far from the only married kamikaze pilot, and somber letters like his were more commonplace than the government had wanted to let on. Had Yukio survived his experience, he likely still would have experienced severe psychological scars, like those experienced by many trained kamikaze pilots who didn't die during the war. In his book, Kamikaze Diaries, Reflections of Japanese Student Soldiers, Irokawa Daikichi wrote, "We tried to live with 120% intensity rather than waiting for death. We read and read, trying to understand why we had to die in our early 20s. We felt the clock ticking away toward our death, every sound of the clock shortening our lives." According to Daikichi, there would sometimes be severe consequences for the mere act of surviving for too long. There was one reported case of a kamikaze pilot who returned back to his base a suspicious number of times. After his 9th return on what was supposed to be a deadly mission, he was shot by his superiors for cowardice. The deep fear and shame instilled in kamikaze pilots for surviving their attacks isn't just limited to the accounts of Daikichi. In 2015, a 92-year-old surviving kamikaze pilot named Hisao Horiyama spoke to The Guardian about his experiences with the Special Attack Unit. After graduating from military training, his unit was given a personal visit from Emperor Hirohito, instilling in the men the grave importance of their deadly mission. Horiyama said that at the time he believed that the Emperor and the nation of Japan were one and the same. When a slip of white paper came to him asking for his participation in the Special Attack Unit, on every conceivable level, he believed he had no choice but to die for his Emperor. He said to The Guardian, "We didn't think too much about dying. We were trained to suppress our emotions. Even if we were to die, we knew it was for a worthy cause. Dying was the ultimate fulfillment of our duty, and we were commanded not to return. We knew that if we returned alive, that our superiors would be angry." As part of getting these conscripts to truly accept their death and minimize the risk of them choking at pivotal moments during the mission, the pilots were made to write their last will and testament, and also send letters to their parents reflecting on their lives and deaths. To many kamikaze pilots, they were brainwashed into feeling like they were already dead before they even got situated in the cockpit. This led to some rather horrific psychological effects for those who survived and were not executed by their superiors. When Horiyama saw the war come to an end, unlike many who would be elated to have at least made it out alive, he fell into a deep state of depression. He later told The Guardian, "I felt bad that I hadn't been able to sacrifice myself for my country. My comrades who had died would be remembered in infinite glory, but I had missed my chance to die in the same way. I felt like I had let everyone down." This was a depressingly common thing that would-be kamikazes had to grapple with after their war came to an end, and they lived on despite losing many of their friends and comrades. Despite the relative success of the kamikaze attacks under Yukio Seki, the Battle of Leyte Gulf was a complete and total disaster for the Japanese war effort. The Allies had destroyed so many enemy ships that the Empire of Japan was rendered unable to mobilize its naval forces in remotely comparable numbers for the duration of the war. Rather than focusing on how to mitigate the costly losses in personnel, the wrong lesson was taken from Leyte Gulf, and the Special Attack Unit program was given a much higher budget and efforts to expand the concept into additional types of vehicles. The most notable addition to the program was the production of the Yokosuka MXY-7 Oka, a unique aircraft that was purpose-built to accommodate an explosive warhead meant to execute critically damaging taitaris to enemy vessels. The plane was not equipped with any other weapons and was streamlined for maximum diving speed. In certain renderings, the name Oka meant cherry blossom, which presents a chilling parallel to Yukio Seki's pre-mission message to his students. However, the Allies, who were quickly developing countermeasures, disparaged the Yokosuka MXY-7 Oka by calling it the Baka Bomb, with the word baka being Japanese for idiot, as any anime fans in our audience will know. Allied air defenses were able to pick up on the nuances of the reckless Japanese strategy. Once the shock and surprise of repeated attacks became merely expected, anti-kamikaze tactics were drawn up. The most famous of those defense systems was codenamed Big Blue Blanket and was meant to make sure that Allied combat planes would reach and shoot down kamikazes before they had a chance to target the important ships in the fleet. The added pressure of better air defense from the Allies made the skill of individual pilots a greater factor in carrying out successful taiyatari, which directly undermined the inherent loss involved in the Special Attack Unit program. Now, unlike in conventional air warfare, a kamikaze pilot who proved himself could never be utilized again. Japan was losing its best soldiers even when it could sink enemy crafts, and those who couldn't pull off the attacks were simply not skilled enough to be of consistent use to their cause. With the Allies becoming more prepared and capable of preventing kamikaze attacks, it might have seemed prudent for Japanese strategists to reevaluate the need for the Special Attack Unit program. However, the true scope of the defeat at the Battle of Leyte Gulf meant that pivoting to a new way of fighting was simply infeasible based on Japan's remaining assets. Their best option to reduce the loss of lives was to surrender to the Allies, as it was apparent that the fall of the Axis was now only a matter of time. The Empire of Japan would not yield, however, and continued to perpetuate myths to its own people about the necessity of the kamikaze. Even though it was now objectively a losing strategy, the lack of a reasonable alternative that could win the war meant that committing to kamikaze would at least preserve the empire's national pride. The cultural importance of special attack units superseded their original goal of winning battles, and became a cornerstone in the fomenting of an unofficial state Shinto, a militant corruption of Japan's most long-held Shinto religious traditions. Like most fascist governments, Japan was appealing to stories of old, propping up the celebrated samurai hero Kusunoki Masahige as something of an aspirational figure for a special attack unit pilot. Masahige's most famous quote, "If I had 7 lives, I would gladly give all of them for my country," became something of a rallying cry, and ceremonies mimicking samurai aesthetics and iconography became a part of the takeoff procedure for kamikaze pilots. Many of them drank ceremonial sake before flying, and even took familial swords with them into the air. All the while, as the Allies continued to gain more territory in the Pacific, experimental special attack weapons were in the works. In a manner similar to the sudden embrace of the Yokosuka MXY-7 Oka, engineering ideas that were once seen as defeatist were given approval and sent into production, though some of these vehicles never saw deployment, such as the Shinyo Special Attack Speedboat and the Kairyo Special Attack Submarine. There was one that reached completion on production to mixed results. Kaiten torpedoes, explosive submarine missiles guided by onboard pilots, were hastily designed in the later years of the war for the purpose of underwater taiyatari, but did not see proportional success even when compared to kamikaze pilots. Throughout the war, it is estimated that less than a third of all kamikaze attacks were able to sink their intended targets. The Kaiten didn't even manage to cause an eighth in Allied deaths what it cost in domestic casualties during deployment. While a direct hit could cause significant damage, even more so than strategic bombing, the Allies had simply outgunned and outsmarted the special attack unit strategy, which had become predictable. Japan was bleeding troops as the Empire prepared for what it thought would be an Allied land invasion. The defenses for Tokyo Bay and other key entrances were bleak in their devotion to kamikaze-like tactics. Shinyo, Kairyu, and even the most directly sacrificial kind of special attack unit, the Fukuryu or Crouching Dragons, a freshly trained force of 6,000 men in diving suits who would be equipped with mines mounted on bamboo poles to ram into the enemy and detonate, were set to hold the line with their own lives. But when the surrender of the Japanese Empire ended most of the fighting, these costly and desperate units were scrapped, and any plans to use them were abandoned. It is without a doubt that in World War II, the fearsome kamikaze was a symbol of mass death. But when it comes to which side suffered the most for the practical implementation of the maneuver, it seems that the Empire of Japan was a victim of its own mythological narrative, which, much like the kamikaze planes themselves, tragically went down in flames. Now check out What If Kamikaze Pilots Survived? Crazy kamikaze facts you didn't know, or watch this video instead.